You are watching the first episode of Season 2 right now on A Healthier Charlotte. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of A Healthier Charlotte and supporting us into our second season. I'm your host, Bobby DeMuro. And speaking of debuting Season 2, what better way to do it than to cover a topic always up for discussion, crime and public safety. Today, we will look at how crime prevention isn't just a job for the police, but rather one that the whole community must undertake, and we'll discuss how a rapidly growing city like Charlotte approaches public safety and emergency preparedness. First things first, though, let's meet our three guests who join me on the panel today. First, at the far end of the table, Craig Allen is a crime prevention officer here in town with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Next to him, Carl De La Guerra is the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for Metro Special Police, a private company providing law enforcement and security services. And finally, my neighbor, Jim Jansen, is a retired fire captain and the brains behind Fireman Jim, an innovative act that teaches public safety and emergency preparedness lessons to children throughout Charlotte. Welcome to the show, guys. Good to have you.
Hey, thank you.
Insert generic criminal background joke here, and let's move on. So, Craig, let's start with you. How do you measure the effectiveness of police work and public safety? I mean, we look at crime rates, we can look at violent numbers like that, but how do you really know you're doing a good job? Is it number of people affected?
No, absolutely. One thing that we look at are the crime stats. Our commanders and lieutenants, captains, they get together every Monday and talk about what's happened during the week prior and what our plan of action will be for the weeks to come. And that's how we look at it, it's not just the numbers, but what the feedback we're getting from the community as well, and the feedback we're getting from the officers in the street.
And Carl, you know, the game maybe is a little bit different for you in the private business versus the public sector, but I have a feeling it's the same thing at the end of the day. How do you go through effectiveness for clients and businesses and organizations that hire you, or you're essentially doing the same thing?
Well, what citizens of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and in fact the state of North Carolina have here is what citizens would know of as a classic partnership between the private and public sector. We enjoy a very, very good relationship with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and have for many years now. So the end game is all still the same, the safety of the public.
And Jim, you know, when we look at effectiveness for Fireman Jim, for something like a program like that for kids, you're looking at something very different. But at the end of the day, how do you, I guess, determine that kids are taking away your message and using it and at the end of the day being safer for themselves and their families?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll get feedback often from teachers or parents who would email me, Facebook, you know, whatever. And they just tell me their story. One story in particular was a young lad who saw his mom bringing a candle on a table, which he thought was kind of close to the curtains. So he went over and he approached his mom and he said, "Mom, Fireman Jim in his song, 'Don't Handle the Candle,' says the candle shouldn't be close to the curtains." And I'm reading this. I'm like, that's great. But you know you're getting the point across.
Craig, when we look at crime and we look at crime rates, have we been successful? I mean, we can talk numbers all day. We know the crime rates are coming down. So on that end, we have. But looking at, is there more to that? Looking at community policing, are we doing the right things and are we in the right direction?
Yeah, I truly think we are in the right direction. We're trying to engage the community more. We're giving back to the community as far as responsibility. We want the community to get engaged a whole lot more than what they have in the past. We have, you know, the different social media aspects of things that we're engaging in now through Facebook, Twitter, and the Crime Stoppers program has been phenomenal this past year. We've reached record numbers of calls as well as the amounts given back to the citizens who have called in with those tips. So I think the feedback is coming two ways now, and through that effort, you'll see crime decrease. Now, one thing we're having to work on is the fear of crime within the communities. Obviously, if you live in an area, you know, like Greer Heights, for example, they've had 3 homicides in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously, their fear of crime has greatly increased, where some other areas within the city have decreased because they haven't had those type issues.
You mentioned something interesting, and when we look at Greer Heights, which is maybe kind of a unique case that doesn't necessarily happen all year, but looking at something like that and looking at Facebook and Twitter and how social media works, do tools like that, do mass communications tools sort of heighten the fear in a case like this, or does it help communicate safety messages that can actually calm people down?
I think it can definitely work against you, but we look at it as working for us, because if we can get the right information, the correct information out there, then we can get ahead of the rumors, so to speak. And I think that's what a lot of people not get off on, but really dwell on are some of the rumors. But once we get the truth out there and say, hey, it's not as bad as you may think, let's look at it in this way, I think we do a better job with that.
You know, something else, not to focus just on you, but I'm interested in the funding aspect because, you know, economy's bad, funds are tough, CMS has problem. I mean, it goes across the board, and I know you guys feel some of these restrictions.
Sure.
How does that affect resources, besides the obvious? How does it affect coverage and things like that, and what do you have to do to make up for that?
Well, we're trying to be innovative in how we approach certain crime. We're trying to utilize our manpower more effectively. The captains, for example, over their divisions, they may see a crime happen within a certain area within their division. Well, they can deploy that manpower that they have, change shifts, you know, put more out there at certain times of day, certain days of the week. And so there's a lot more flexibility now than we've had in the past with utilizing our resources within the department. Because, you know, times are tight for everybody. We have our wish list of items we like to get, but, you know, until we get those things, we have to work with what we have. And I think we're doing a better job with that.
And Carl, where do you guys come in there? Because I feel like you mentioned the public-private partnership.
Absolutely.
And when resources are tough in the public, I know CMPD wants to be everywhere and does a pretty good job, but can't see everything. Do you pick up the slack for businesses and private individuals? And do you see people coming to you knowing that times are tight in terms of public funding? They say, well, we may need to fund this privately to protect our interest or our business or whatever it is.
You know, Bobby, I don't think we so much pick up the slack because CMPD does run a tight ship. However, we're like any other private business. We suffer when a recession comes about. However, we do see an increase in services when there is a high crime, you know, happening in one area. But you really have to look at crime as being something cyclic. You know, you pointed out Greer Heights. Our office is in the middle of Greer Heights. We're in that neighborhood there. Crime comes and crime goes, you know, throughout the entire city. So we're really focused on high crime areas around there and working with CMPD in that. Our jurisdictional boundaries are different than theirs in the fact that our jurisdictional boundaries are on the private properties that are there versus the city police who have the entire city jurisdiction. But we are very much focused on individual clients. Some of those areas can be very vast, though.
And I think what you're both getting at is the term hotspotting, where we're looking at where crime, kind of focusing more resources on where crime is high than where it's low. Is that the most maybe economically feasible way to fight crime nowadays, especially when funding is tight on both ends?
Well, it's definitely a tool that we have because you want to put your resources where they're most needed, obviously, and that's what we're seeing here. Regardless of if it's private or public police departments, we're going to put our resources where they're most needed, and that's where you can utilize them the best. If you got areas that, you know, it's infrequent crime, then you may have just a few officers riding through and whatnot, but the majority are going to be in those high crime areas.
Jim, I want to get you involved now. We can talk crime with you, I'm sure. But let's
I'm not a criminal.
Not yet. Let's broaden this out a little bit to public safety, and I'll go back to them and goals for a second. But when you look at some of the goals of public safety, from your perspective, emergency preparedness, fire safety, with your background and your experience, what should we be looking at to accomplish as far as goals with young people, what they learn, what they take away from your programs or something else? How do we create tangible goals to know that young people are going to be safer as they grow up?
Mm-hmm. I think there's two parts to that. The first is obviously to reduce these statistics. We want to reduce crime, we want to reduce fires, and reduce injuries, especially unintentional injuries.
Yeah.
The second part of that is we didn't grow up as kids, well, I didn't, with smoke detectors in the house. Now, of course, everybody has a smoke detector. We didn't grow up with all this safety information, you know, being thrown at us and taught to us in the schools and coming from the public and the private sector. And now it's kind of common. Of course, we do things that way. To let it become like a mindset in these kids and young adults, and especially the parents too, and get the kids to where they can recognize a safety hazard, whether it's their skateboard at the bottom of a set of stairs or whatever it is. Tie your shoes, and to kind of help mitigate that, remove the skateboard. But also to reach the parents, so it becomes more like a train the trainer, the parent become a trainer in a way, and so they can keep reinforcing what we're trying to teach professionally. We can't reach hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, so we rely on the parents, civic groups to just kind of spread the word.
It sounds like what you're getting at too when you talk about mitigating things. It's a diversion issue. You'd rather be proactive and get them to stop doing something or to understand a behavior before maybe that it starts. Are kids receptive to that? I mean, I think they see, oh, well, this is a fire tip. Okay, this is cool. He's singing about it. This is entertaining. But are they receptive to the overall message?
They are. Kids identify with police and firefighters for some odd reason, but they love us. So we can use that power of persuasion, the power of the uniform, or the costume of my business. We can use that to our advantage. And if they want to truly identify with us and be like us, then they're going to be safe individuals out there and do what we would have done in that circumstance.
What about from your end in maybe the more criminal perspective? Is it a diversion thing if we can reach young people and really adults in general, both private and publicly? We want to reach them first and get them on the right path rather than try to reform them after it's too late?
I would say it absolutely is. We have, within our department, we have a big community outreach, community relations program also, and we have to get to the community. We have to remember, as uniformed officers, it's not the public's responsibility to get to us, it's our responsibility to get to the public, and especially to reach the kids. Because I would have to agree with Jim, once the kids connect with the uniform, you have a bond there, and it's really an unbreakable bond. I think we're all seeing that.
If you can affect the kids, you eventually can affect the parents.
Yeah.
And because the kids they'll come home, they'll singing the songs, or bringing the coloring books, all that, talking about the positive interaction that they just had with whatever public safety official they dealt with. Yeah, we have a lot of kids programming within the CMPD because we are trying to reach them at a younger age to give them the alternatives as opposed to street life.
Yeah.
And even within CMS, there's a whole big diversion program for the first-time offenders with breaking the school rules and whatnot. So we don't want to get them in the court system. We want to find alternatives for them before they end up in the court system.
Yeah.
You know, kind of give them that second chance type thing.
Well spoken. Stick around, guys. We got to do a second panel with you guys in just a minute. Up next, first though, on A Healthier Charlotte, we've got a special treat. Our man, Fireman Jim, is going to show you exactly what it is he does when he covers public safety, and it's cool stuff. You're going to enjoy it. He goes all over the Queen City. So watch that right now. You're watching A Healthier Charlotte.
Here's the way you're going to do it. The smoke goes up to the ceiling, and you need to crawl under the smoke like this. You see what I'm doing? See how Fireman Jim crawled under the smoke? Follow me. Come on, let's crawl under the smoke. Stay low. That's it. Keep your face close to the floor. Because if all the bad air and smoke is going up, we need to go down low to the floor, right? Very good job.
Crawling, crawling, I'm not stalling, I'm getting out of here. I'm crawling low in smoke, crawling low in smoke. Crawling, crawling, I'm not stalling, I'm getting out of here. I'm crawling low in smoke, crawling low in smoke. Mom and Dad once took me out to get a bite to eat. At the restaurant we sat and I thought I felt some heat. I looked up to the ceiling and I saw the smoke up high. I showed it to my mom and dad and mama said, oh my. I said to mom and dad, we need to get right out of here. We got down on the floor where we could see the air was clear. The firefighter said if we see smoke don't ever hide. We found the nearest exit door and crawled to get outside. Crawling, crawling, I'm not stalling, I'm getting out of here. I'm crawling low in smoke, crawling low in smoke. Crawling, crawling, I'm not stalling, I'm getting out of here. I'm crawling low in smoke, crawling low in smoke.
Welcome back into A Healthier Charlotte, and thanks for sticking with us for more of the roundtable discussion on crime and public safety here in Charlotte. Let's get right back to it. And Craig, I want to start with you. This is going to sound like maybe kind of a morbid question, but it's something that interests me. You know, much is made in the media about school shootings and national tragedies and these big things that really get covered on CNN. I know you guys train for stuff like that, but at the same time, it's tough to predict them happening. Is there a focus there, or is it more just on day-to-day interaction with the community, maybe more common events that you know take place and kind of just preparing for the worst, but understanding the worst isn't likely to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. We do train on the worst case scenarios, obviously, but it's more the day-to-day interactions that we concentrate on. You know, likelihood of a school shooting is very slim. You know, it can happen. Fortunately, it doesn't happen that often, but we are prepared to react to that if it does occur. But we'd rather look at the prevention aspect. What can we do before that happens, before it gets to that point? And that's where we need the community's input as well as police input. You know, if you identify some students who may be exhibiting those characteristics that we've seen in the news, we need to know about that so we can intervene ahead of time. And public's been good about that.
What about you, Carl? What about the training aspect on the private side? I assume it's pretty similar to the public side in terms of preparing for whether it's a tragedy or just a common crime. Is it the same sort of steps you go through to kind of prepare for dealing with that?
Well, we don't have an established academy. We actually are a statewide agency. We have training that's required for us by the state. While that particular training is not as extensive as a police department would be, much of our experience comes from prior law enforcement officers that come to our agency to become part of our program here. We're very fortunate operationally to be backed up by CMPD and other law enforcement agencies around the state, but we train particularly in an all-hazards approach, which means we have to be able to sustain any situation for a period of 20 minutes as our officers await the arrival of first responders.
Now, you know, Jim, what about with you? I mean, I can ask you the same question, but from a different perspective with public safety. A lot of people don't think about emergency preparedness or fire safety until maybe the worst happens and it's too late and boy, you know, I should have learned CPR. I should have, you know, read the tornado warning, whatever it is. Is that kind of a common thing you have to fight to get people to prepare before something happens and maybe in a hypothetical situation?
I don't know if it's something we fight or like an uphill battle. I think it's more a constant reminder. People get it. You know, people out there are pretty smart, and they do get it, and they do make some preparations when you talk to them. And what happens is the next generation comes up, you know, the kids grow up, they get married, become parents. They may or may not have heard this information, so we need to train them now, and then the next one, and so forth. You know, Fireman Jim Safety shows, I try to focus on more like a personal disaster preparedness. What happens, kids, if you see daddy laying in the garage and there's blood? That's a huge disaster. That's as big as a tornado to that little kid.
Yeah.
Or you never want to get caught in a fire, but if you do, here's some saving measures you can take immediately. You know, crawling low, get under the smoke, stick your face in your shirt because your clothes and trap some air, and you might be able to get a breath, which will help you get to the door. So I kind of more work on that level, the individual preparedness.
Yeah. What about, Craig, now on the individual level, what is the biggest area of concern in town, maybe regardless of neighborhood? Is it drugs? Is it violence? I mean, what's a big push for the CMPD right now?
Well, it really depends on the type area that you live in as to when we talk to neighbors, you know, what we see as a potential crime element or a high crime area. You talk to neighbors and they don't feel that same way. There's some other things that are more of a priority to them. So it's very important to get their feedback so we know which direction to go. Obviously, like I said before, we work off a lot of the crime numbers, and that's where we're going to put our resources. And but you got to have that feedback and that interaction, again, because what we feel is important, the neighbors may not. And you got to find that happy medium in there.
Carl, what about on your end with the private side of it? When you work with businesses, work with private organizations, is it specifically maybe protecting clients' interests that you're more focused on? Or you mentioned the 20-minute training rule. I mean, is it more of that to bridge the gap to public officials? I mean, what's the focus there?
If I can piggyback on what Craig said, we are very, very focused on the crime prevention aspect, and because we have the opportunity to work very focused with individual clients, we are very, very focused on what Craig was saying, that we deal with their perception. We always find there's two perception things. There's the perceived perception that the public and businesses very often have, and then there's the real perception. And for that real perception, you know, law enforcement and public safety as a whole puts their head together to come up with that calculation. But the private or the perceived perception is something that we combat on a daily basis, and we're very fortunate within our agency to be able to target that specifically.
And you set me up for this perfectly with the perception, so I've got to ask about misconceptions. Maybe make a donut joke. Maybe make a rent-a-cop joke. I mean, those are, you know, I'm clearly joking, but those are two misconceptions. Maybe more on a serious aspect, though. Craig and Carl, what are the misconceptions that really drive you crazy that really kind of need to be aired out so the police and the public can work better together?
Well, the biggest thing, I mean, we are there to help.
Yeah.
It's not just to arrest people. That's kind of a last resort. We want people to obey the law, so we don't even have to take action. And that would be awesome if they did. You know, I'd give my job up in no time for that. That's not the reality. But just for people to do their part out there and take responsibility for what they do. And again, we're there to help. Fire department gets a lot of love from people, because they're the helpers. But we're there as well. It's not, and again, it's not just to make the arrest and whatnot.
What about for you, Carl? Is there a distrust? I mean, do people say, "Oh, you're not the CMPD, so you're not a real cop"? I mean, that's I don't mean to be disrespectful, but
I understand. What it really begins with perception.
Yeah.
We see within any department that's out there, we see those that just don't look fit for the job, that just don't look prepared for the job. We run across very little of that because we do maintain a high standard. One of the things you have to understand, and with the public as a whole, North Carolina is one of the few states in the nation, just a handful, that recognizes private policing. And actually enacts that through agencies such as ours. So it's an educational curve that we're continuously going uphill to educate the public in who we are and what we do.
Is private policing the future? Knowing some funding issues, knowing resource issues on the public side, will we see more private policing across the country?
I think we're going to start seeing, especially homeowners associations, large areas like that, that will have their individualized, personalized security. But that private-public partnership between private police and public police is always going to exist.
And it sounds like you guys have a pretty good relationship, personally and on the organization level. You guys work very closely together.
Our agencies do.
Yeah.
Yeah, agencies,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
As well as the other, there's a lot of other agencies out there as well that that we interact with daily, and it's the same thing. There's a lot of good working.
Well, let's open that up, and to all three of you now, what role does a community play? I realize we leave 2.5 minutes to talk about this. Maybe the most important question there is, but from an emergency preparedness, from a crime, any of these things we're talking about, how important is the community to be active and involved in this?
Well, the communities have to realize that in the event of a major disaster, the system is going to be taxed way beyond what it was designed to be. And people may have to become their own first responders. So things like knowing some first aid, knowing CPR, having a disaster kit, having these things in place is what's going to help them the most. The response time is just going to grow incredibly during a major event, and we just can't get to everybody. So, I work with my own HOA, and in fact, we just changed the name of our community watch to Safety Committee. So it encompasses many things, not just watching for crime, but watching for a safety hazard, or speeding car, or whatever. And when something is seen that's out of line, I get the call, and we try to rectify that.
So, Craig, last question to you now. What does the community need to do? Somebody's watching this. They say, okay, I trust the cops. I like them. What do they do? How do they get involved to maybe make your job easier?
Well, the easiest thing to do is they start talking to their neighbors and say, hey, let's start. If you're not already part of a community watch, if you're not already organized, then start getting organized. Contact your division that you live in and talk to your community coordinators. You can call us at the Crime Prevention Unit. We're out at headquarters. We oversee the whole crime prevention community watch program for the county. But then our partners are the coordinators in the divisions. But first of all, you got to take responsibility for yourself and your family, and then pass that along to your neighbors. And from there, it will grow. But you got to take that first step and say, I want to get involved. How do I do it? And then you can go to our website. You can educate yourself, and that's always a good first step.
Good stuff. Very interesting, guys, and I made it through a whole segment with the police without being arrested. Just kidding. Thank you guys for coming. Really, very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, buddy.
All right, guys, thank you for joining us on the show this week, too. We are out of time on A Healthier Charlotte for the episode, but I want to remind you to visit cltblog.com for more unique video content on all types of news, info, and current events specific to the Queen City. You can connect with us on Facebook and Twitter through cltblog.com as well. All right, well, for our guests on the panel today and for our crew on the floor in the studio, thank you so much for tuning into the show this week. Reminding you that as you go along, you don't need talent, you just need courage. I'm Bobby DeMuro, and this has been A Healthier Charlotte.